Startup Grind is a blast because we get to learn from people in our industry, people like Darsh Singh, who I want you guys to all stand up and give him a big Startup Grind welcome to Darsh Singh. And Darsh Singh joined Satori in 2012 as Satori's Alpha Portfolio Manager. I do not know what that is, but he's going to let us know what all the secrets of being on the investment committee there. And in that role, he's responsible for sourcing, evaluating, and monitoring investment opportunities on behalf of Satori's partners and principals. Before that, Darsh spent 3 years managing the equity and fixed income and hedge fund investments for a family office in San Antonio. Besides outsourcing, evaluating, and selecting outside managers, he also managed the internally traded portfolio and developed hedge fund strategies to match the risk targets and return requirements of the family, where he specialized in developing innovative volatility-based strategies. But this is the thing I think is really interesting, and hopefully he's going to tell us a little bit about it, because I covered the National Security Agency here in San Antonio, which also is called No Such Agency. And Darsh worked in U.S. intelligence for the National Security Agency. You're going to tell us all about that, right? And in his time at the agency, he primarily spent time in the top secret world of signals intelligence, developing, testing, and implementing tools for the offense. And Darsh is finishing his master's degree in financial mathematics at Johns Hopkins University. When do you have time to do that? He received a BS in engineering science from Trinity University, where I learned you were an RA there. And Cole Wallach was on his floor. And so you have to tell us all about what Cole did to get in trouble, and you had to write him up. I used to be an RA too, so I know the kind of challenges those freshmen put people through. And this is also interesting, you were the first ever turbaned Sikh to play in the NCAA basketball. All right, good breaking ground there in every kind of area. Okay, so without further ado, let's just get started and talk. So maybe you can tell me a little bit about what it was like growing up here in San Antonio. And where did you go to high school?
Sure.
That kind of thing.
So I was born and raised here in San Antonio. My parents are back there. You can see them, my dad and my mom and my lovely wife. You can wave to them. They're all awesome. But born and raised in San Antonio, I went to Thornton Elementary, Rudder Middle School, O'Connor High School, so through the public school system here in San Antonio, and then I went to Trinity University here in town. So San Antonio, sort of born and bred and educated, and all the way through. Growing up in San Antonio, so what did that entail? Lots of trips to SeaWorld when we were kids. Loved the Spurs. You know, that's what got me into basketball. Probably see one end up there. So the biggest Spurs fan in this room is probably my mom, and she's inculcated the love of the Spurs in me. And 3 brothers, and we used to play basketball. We always had a game of 2-on-2. Although I have 2 older brothers, and when you're growing up, there's kind of an age gap. And so my older brothers always wanted to play on the same team against me and my little brother. And it was just like they were 12 and 11, and we were, call it 9 and 7 or something like that. So they would just beat us down. Play basketball. They would give us 90 points, play to 100, and we'd always lose. Those are some of the memories of childhood, getting brutally beaten in basketball. But I love San Antonio. My father started a company in 1986. He started a engineering consulting firm that morphed into IT consulting and defense contracting, and so it grew up in the home of an entrepreneur, and that's kind of the life that I understood, and saw how the family would get involved. Us being at the firm, sometimes stuffing envelopes, and got to see how my mom was involved, and that was my experience growing up here in town.
And so your dad is GP Singh, and he founded Carta Technologies here in town, and he started in a garage too, right? The entrepreneurial garage story. So when you saw your dad doing the real grind of being an entrepreneur, did it encourage you to want to follow the same path and start a company or did it discourage you from doing that?
Definitely encourage, and I think when you see it as a child, that's sort of the only way you know. And so I think as I left Trinity and joined different organizations, I always had the desire to build. And I want to create something, and it's very hard to want to not be in as much control you can have. Maybe you don't have much control, but very hard not to control your own destiny when it comes to your career. And so that was something I took away. I think also seeing the balance and the focus on priorities from my parents, both of them, because it wasn't just my dad, it was my mom and my dad who helped start the company. And so seeing the sacrifices that were made and the focus on what were the most important things in life really inspired me to say, not just I want to start my own company, but there's a right way to launch a company, there's a right way to start a company, and I think my parents struggled through understanding that, and I got to witness that, and it's sort of standing on the shoulders of giants is the way I think about it, is take that forward and learn from what they've learned, and iterate and do it even better the next time. Kind of the standard engineering approach is constantly iterating and being better and better every time. And I see myself as an extension of that.
Okay. All right, say your mom's name, because I don't know your mom's name.
It goes by Winky.
All right, Winky. Way to go. So, and people know the end story. It was a big success and employed a lot of people, but you saw it grow throughout the stages. So you know the good times and the bad times and everything in between. So it's a lot of times people get into entrepreneurship with the end result in mind. So the process, like watching the sausage being made.
Absolutely. I think in some sense, being in the startup world is romanticized. Everybody who has a startup knows it's hard. I think people romanticize it once it goes well, and they can look back and say those are the good old days when there's 2 people and pizza every night. But it's a grind, right? It's a lot of blocking and tackling, a lot of just sorting through what's important in life, what's important, in terms of messaging or focus, and how do we prioritize. There's so much to do, whether we focus on product development or sales or whatever you need to do. It's a grind, and it takes a lot. And I think that witnessing that growing up helped me realize that it's sometimes it's not really about being smart. It's about executing with intelligence and being very thoughtful about prioritization and strategic on how you spend your bandwidth. And I remember my father gave me, he told me once, he said, there's 2 things that you have that are yours, and that's your mind and your breaths. And so you can choose what you want to do with both. And that's what you can control, and that's what you can focus on, and create something positive with that, right? That was the idea of what he was communicating. So focus on how you spend every breath and make sure it's in line with your values and your priorities. And tap into the potential of your mind, which is endless and vast, and never lose that thirst for learning and being open to new ideas.
That's great. And it sounded like, from what you said, he included the whole family, and it was a family business. I always thought it was, I didn't know about the involvement of your brothers and your mom in the business. So you guys spent weekends and nights and stuff at the office, at the firm?
Here and there. I think my mom spent the most amount of time out of all of us. So my father started the business the year I was born. And so he was raising two at once, right? And then he had 4 boys total. So my mom and dad were raising 4 kids while they were, launching that business in the middle of having kids, and raising them here in San Antonio. We spent a lot of time there. I remember stuffing envelopes. I did internships. So I remember working on a calibrator for an F-16 jet for one of the projects we were working on. The next year, I remember learning, Flash, like right when it came out, and how to program in Flash, which was so cool when it first started. And it's so cumbersome if you try to, build a lot in there now with those tools that we had back then. But I was involved in that. My brothers were involved in different capacities with different lines of business. We were all involved, and it was just awesome to learn. It was really fun to be around people, and I can't put into words how much that meant and how much we developed because of that experience.
And so now let's flash forward to today. You work for Satori Capital, and you're based in Fort Worth.
Mm-hmm.
So what is Satori Capital? Can you tell us a little bit about what the firm does?
Sure. So Satori is a multi-strategy investment firm rooted in the principles of conscious capitalism. What that means is we look at investments across the spectrum of the investment world, across alternatives. So we do kind of everything except for stocks and bonds. When I say conscious capitalism, we view capitalism as one of the most powerful forces in the world. You can kind of look back, and a lot of people might say capitalism is this or that or whatever, but the reality that I see is capitalism has lifted so many people out of poverty. Today, when we look at capitalism as a very powerful force, it can be for good or for bad. And when it's short-term focused and when it's shareholder wealth maximization focused, we believe it tends to be bad. So conscious capitalism is the idea of being long-term focused and stakeholder-centric. That when you make decisions in your business, you think about how it affects and impacts employees, how it impacts service providers, how it impacts clients, sales channels, the environment, the community within which you operate, and you reflect and really make sure that those stakeholders are being thought of when you're making these decisions. The thesis is that this approach will make more money in the long run. And so we want to support businesses that think this way and investment ideas that have this approach. There's a lot of research out there, some great books. Firms of Endearment is a great book that talks about firms that have embraced this approach, whether it's Whole Foods or Patagonia, REI, businesses like that. And Southwest Airlines versus American Airlines is like the classic example. And it's demonstrated great outperformance, so to speak, financially. Now, it's funny whenever I share this with my family because my dad will tease me and say, that's just good business. That's just the right way to do things. And that was what attracted me to Satori, was that they operate in a way that I've always said, this is how you're supposed to do it. You're supposed to think about the ecosystem, and you're not supposed to destroy an ecosystem in the short term in pursuit of short-term profits. If you cultivate that ecosystem over time, it can generate a net positive to society, to all stakeholders. So that's what attracted me to Satori, and I ultimately joined them to help lead their alternatives unit.
So is the conscious capitalism like social good? I've heard that term used, the Tom Shoe model, where you buy a pair of shoes and somebody in need gets a pair of shoes. Is that considered conscious capitalism, or are you talking about the systems that are used to create the products and all through the cycle of a business?
I would say all of the above. I would say both those, and the idea is conscious, and it's we've seen this. I think the Time magazine cover recently was the mindful movement or the mindfulness movement or something like that. That's what this is about. Let's be thoughtful before we strictly focus on optimizing the numbers of wealth maximization for shareholders. If you think about it, this is a systemic flaw in the way that companies are run in the U.S. In that, if let's say I'm running a furniture company or something like that, and maybe it's valued at whatever $80 a share, and I get two offers. One is for $100 and one is for $98. The $100 offer is from somebody who's going to liquidate my business, fire everybody, and shut the business down because they have their own furniture company. And the offer from the 98 for $98 a share is maybe from a company that does, let's say, home building, and they say there's some good synergies here. We can sell the furniture directly. I don't know, making up an example. And there's we're going to employ more people, and there's some good that can come out of this for society and for all stakeholders. As a fiduciary, I would be legally obligated, and there's precedent for this, to take the $100 bid, which means we're going to crush the system. That sucks. That just sucks. This is what our system encourages, and the more and more we set precedents like that, the more and more we're encouraging this short-term thinking, this profit focus that doesn't really take into account the ecosystems that we can be cultivating for better and better use over time. And so that's where the passion comes from. And so, kind of taking a step back, there's lots of people who talk about impact investing versus mission-based investing or conscious capitalism. I think there's a fundamental sort of dichotomy that doesn't need to exist, where people say either I can maximize profits or I can do good. That's the big lie. The big lie is that you can do one or the other. And we fundamentally believe that actually if you do both, you'll make more money in the long run. And that's what's exciting about what we're doing at Satori, and where we've gained traction both in private equity, in venture investing, in alternatives investing, and across the spectrum of, if we're focused on stakeholders, we can create great outcomes for everybody, not just for maximizing money for ourselves.
That's interesting. It reminds me of Dr. Goodnight Jim Goodnight at SAS, which is always routinely named one of the best companies to work for, and they've never gone public. Mm-hmm. And I did an interview with him a long time ago, and he said the reason they didn't go public is that he knew how to run his company, and he didn't want the market to tell him how to run his company. Mm-hmm. So he was able to do all the things and grow this great big company. I think it's one of the largest employers in North Carolina, and make profit and have happy employees and do everything that people say you can only do in the public markets. Mm-hmm. But there's examples, there's lots of, HEB I guess would be one here.
HEB is a great one here in town, the Container Store, which is nearby, Whole Foods in Austin. We got some great examples in Texas, some phenomenal leaders who recognize the value of cultivating good ecosystems. I think we have one here. What's happening here at Geekdom and cultivating the tech community, I think is just visionary. It's awesome. It's so cool to see everybody getting together and collaborating, and it creates so many new opportunities that are positive for everybody. There's no value destruction in collaboration and in thinking about all the stakeholders. It's value creation, and I think that's exciting for San Antonio, very exciting.
Okay, and now speaking of San Antonio, does your firm have any investments in San Antonio? And if not, why not? And what kind of things could these people out here that are entrepreneurs at Geekdom be doing that might catch the interest? I mean, are you late stage, early stage? What stage?
Sure. There's a couple questions in there.
I know, there was like a bunch of going.
Let me start with what stage we are. So Satori, in terms of investments, I think a lot of people would be interested to know. In terms of investments, we have a couple lines of business, right? We have private equity, which is sort of emerging mid-market, 3 to 15 million in EBITDA. We are on the hunt for San Antonio-based companies just because the demographics of this town are awesome. And we haven't found anything yet, but we're actively searching on the private equity side. So that's one line of business. Then we have general alternatives, and that kind of is a broad word that means a lot of different things. One investment we have here in San Antonio is student housing. So we've been investing in what we think is a much more community-centric student housing model, where rather than building these boxes for students to live in, we're building communities and houses that can have 20 people in them, so you can have all your friends in there, and it's an entire neighborhood, resort-style pool. And it costs the same as a regular, sort of student housing, but it's just kind of like Geekdom. Now you have a community that you can live with, and all your friends are there, and then you also have access to, luxury amenities that come because of the consolidation of housing, so to speak, and how we structure it. So that's an example of something here. Now, in terms of early stage, late stage, we have a specific niche in the startup that we focus on. We think there's a lot of opportunity that is overlooked in Texas, and so that specific niche is in asset management. And what we find typically is there's basically in asset management, the standard response of how do I manage money is stocks and bonds. And when you go back and you research the history of that, the reason why people did this is because it's the most scalable. I can take on the most business this way, so I'm just going to save stocks and bonds, and I'm not going to do much else. There's so many other opportunities for managing assets in a way that cultivates great things. Geekdom is an example of that, and other opportunities to create something awesome while managing an asset, so to speak. And so we focus on startup asset management firms, and I'll give you an example of one that we're looking at right now, and that's a team that focuses on Class B and Class C real estate. So typically in quote unquote bad neighborhoods, or it's transition neighborhoods or gentrifying neighborhoods, whatever you want to call them. But they go in and they say, you know what, there's a growing demographic in San Antonio for the Hispanic community, but the housing models are really geared towards an individualistic society. Whereas the Hispanic Latino community and frankly the Punjabi and Sikh community and Indian communities like this as well, very collectivist. We like being with our families, we like being with our grandparents, and that's how we operate. So there's an opportunity of what does the market have and what doesn't exist today? And then that would be really, resonate with a certain demographic. You know your target here. And so this group is going in and they'll rehab old apartments that, that are dilapidated, but redesign the entire floor plan to have, 5, 6 bedrooms in a multi-family complex. So grandparents can live there, parents can live there, kids can live there. You can have family over visiting. You convert the tennis courts to soccer fields. You put in a call center so you can call your family back in Mexico or somewhere else. You find the services that are really essential and necessary to that community, wiring money back to Mexico, for example, and create ancillary revenue, right? And it's a service to them because this is, now they have everything they need right at their fingertips, right in their community, and their families there. They can do everything they want in that situation. But if you think about sort of apartment complexes, when you think about it, they're not designed for that. That's not what you think of. And so there's a lot of innovation that can happen in the asset management space. And so that's where we focus specifically. We think it's an underserved area in terms of supporting startups in that space.
What you're saying reminds me a lot about Singapore, because Singapore housing is like that, where you have the houses at top and the bottom is a community, and there's restaurants and there's places, communal areas and shops for everybody, because they need dense housing in that city state. So it's very much of a communal environment. But Texas, people want their wide open spaces. They build these like 5,000 square foot houses, and then they aspire to an 8,000 square foot house. Sure. So that's a sea change in thought. But I think maybe I'm wrong, but millennials, like kids that don't want cars now, and they're looking to urban areas for the future. So is this a trend you're seeing that's on the horizon, or is this something that is on both ends with an aging population and a young population?
It's definitely a trend for the upcoming generation. There's no question about it. I really believe there's a sort of collectivist mindset, collaborative mindset, sort of sustainable ethos is coming out over the next couple of decades, and I think that's a sort of macro tailwind that if you're thoughtful, you can take advantage of in lots of different ways, whether it's through tech startups or asset management startups. But it's a new way of thinking, right? I'll give you an example that I didn't realize that I do until I sort of mentally noted that. But I don't know if you're familiar with the brand Newman's Own. Newman's Own pizza, frozen pizza, by the way, when I was a bachelor. Good way to go. Good pizza, very few chemicals, right? But all the profits from Newman's Own go to charity. And so now, and once I learned that, and he has a great book that I read, and once I learned, it's all charity for kids with mental disabilities and that sort of thing, to go to summer camps together so they have a community. I think that's awesome. And now when I go buy frozen pizza, why wouldn't I buy that pizza? Like that's so much more meaningful now when I have that interaction with that brand, and that's just one example. But I think we see with Tom's Shoes and other things.
Attention. MCS is conducting a fire alarm test. This is only a test. Disregard any alarms. MCS is conducting a fire alarm test. Disregard any alarms.
Okay. We haven't had that happen to us.
Yeah. But I think this brand management through doing the right thing on a macro level, then we saw this kind of with the NSA. Transparency is on the rise. Awareness is on the rise. People are going to get visibility through, not just to what you present on the outside and you're something different on the inside. There's a premium for being genuine these days. And if you can be genuine and transparent and just do the right thing, that's you're going to have a good business. Like if you can focus on executing and do the right thing and be genuine, people will appreciate that. The transparency is appreciated, and it's something that it's going to continue to happen more and more. It's not going away. So I think that's another part of the macro trend that plays a role when you're managing your business.
That's interesting. Well, even here in San Antonio with Rackspace doing the dilapidated old Windsor Park Mall and creating that into a headquarters and potentially a park and revitalizing that community. That's sort of along the lines of what you're talking about, is taking something and that's in a community and bringing life to it.
Mm-hmm. It's just a part of the, I think it's the mindful revolution. It's being thoughtful about allocating assets. It's being thoughtful about allocating time, allocating mental bandwidth. and being more strategic. It's just, we were just joking earlier about how do you even stay on Twitter? There's so much information. It's just like data delusion, constantly being inundated. It's everywhere. There's content being developed, and how do you even stay on top of it? And it's all about, sort of what are priorities, what are values, and if we can kind of create those filters of this is not meaningful, and start focusing more and more on what's meaningful, both as individuals, as businesses, as communities, as cities, and that sort of thing, you can have powerful results from that. I think, the example you gave is a beautiful example of transforming something that, maybe an eyesore, it's underutilized space, or whatever you want to call it, into something that the community can be proud of, that it can engage with, that it can utilize effectively. That's an awesome outcome. And when you reflect on what that means in terms of resource allocation, because of the limited resources we have in this world, what it means for the community to have a collaborative space or somewhere to come together, what it means, in terms of aesthetics and how that affects our being. There's so many benefits from being thoughtful. It's such a simple thing to do. It's so hard to execute, but it really it's transformative when you do it as a community.
You mentioned one book, and if you could mention that again, because I'm an entrepreneur too, and I'm running a startup, and it's really hard to be mindful sometimes because you have so much coming at you, and when you're starting out, you're going at accelerated speed. And I don't know if you ever don't go at accelerated speed, you might be out of business then. But it just seems that it's really hard to maintain that mindfulness in the midst of growth and as a startup when you're starting out. So I'm just wondering what can startups do to maintain keep that focus in mind when you're talking about.
For us, and this goes all the way back to what we believe in and how we invest. This is a core part of our diligence criteria, if you will, is we're always trying to find folks. I'll give two things. One is a non-economic purpose for existence. If you're strictly in it for the money, you're probably not going to make it because it's just. Sorry, I'm just going to tell you that right now. And it's not sustainable over time if you're strictly in it for money. You may get lucky, you may get a lottery ticket, but so we're always looking for a non-economic purpose. Why do you care so much about solving this problem? What does it mean to you to become the premier brand doing this thing in this space? That's a question we ask of all, across any business. And so that's part of it. The other part of it is knowing your purpose, knowing your values, and centering yourself around your values constantly. It's a constant sort of iterative process again. Defining your values, which, your values are how you operate in any given situation, or how you aspire to operate in any given situation. And it's a constant reflection of, okay, I went into this meeting and this is how I responded when somebody said my product wasn't right for them. Is that in line with my values? And you kind of, it's this iterative process of, it makes me comfortable when I'm uncomfortable, but it makes me uncomfortable when I'm comfortable. And this dynamic tension is always pushing and pulling. And that introspection, that meditation, that reflection, whatever you want to call it, that consciousness that you create around your values and who you want to be, and focusing on congruence, I think is the grounding force in an entrepreneur. Because I know just as well as anybody, it's so easy to start running faster and faster and faster. And if I could just get this sale, everything will be fine, and next week will be different. And we all know that you can do that for years and just spin your wheels and spin your wheels and spin your wheels. But that sort of satisfaction of congruence with values, I believe, is the grounding force that creates constant, momentum forward at a sustainable pace.
I guess what I'm conflicted about is when it sounds like you're saying you have to say no to stuff. You have to say no and stay on your path. And then there's all this talk that you have to say yes to everything and be open to everything. Otherwise, opportunity won't come your way. So right. It's difficult to sometimes marry those conflicting. Like some people tell you don't be in it for the money, but what's your exit strategy?
Right.
And how am I going to get my money back from your investment? Mm-hmm. So it's kind of, you know what I'm saying? It's a little bit conflicting in the startup world.
Yeah, I think it's having that stakeholder-centric approach, which is what we believe in, is you can be thoughtful about an exit or multiple paths to exit. You can be thoughtful about it, but focusing on the outcome is not going to get you there. It's a grind. Focus on the process and focus on what you can do. What mastery can you achieve in the process? You know, you have what's here. You know it's going to take these 15 steps to get there. And now I'm going to focus execution here and reflect, is it still getting me there? And execution here and reflect, is it still getting me to where I want to be? Do I need to change this target? And it's that mastery of execution, that mastery of the grind that I think really, really transforms a startup from being an idea into being, you know, something successful.
And then that goes to the platitude also that embrace your failure, and failure only leads you to success kind of thing. So I guess there's a lot of failures that you experience to shape your vision of what you're...
Absolutely. I have an engineering background, and it's I say this all the time, it's iterate. You just iterate and you iterate and you iterate. And you know, I was with Cole earlier, we were looking at one of his products, and he was saying, well, it's not working perfectly right now. Well, of course it's not working perfectly, otherwise you'd be done. You know, it's not going to be working 99% of the time. And it's, we have a phrase at Satori, we always say, is we're getting there. I don't think we'll ever say we're here. We're always getting there. And we smile when we say it because it's enjoy the journey, enjoy the process. This is the beauty of creation, of innovation, of doing new things, of doing cool things. And so, yeah, whenever something doesn't work, then it's not exactly the outcome we were looking for. We're getting there, and that's a step in the right direction.
Yeah, it kind of makes me think about our whole school system, because that's based on, you know, a grade system that if you fail, you're not learning.
Right.
Whereas you could be learning more than anybody in class.
Absolutely.
You just need to do it again to get it.
Absolutely.
But okay, so what I want to ask you is what do you think San Antonio does right in the technology industry, and what do you think this city needs to improve upon?
Oh, that's a good question. What does San Antonio do right? A lot of things. I think San Antonio has a couple of characteristics and sort of underlying currents that I think are phenomenal. You know, when you think about the friendliness of the town, the collaborative nature, the openness of people here, I think that's just unbelievable. I grew up here, you know, then I went to work at the NSA, which is, you know, very different culture, and lived in, you know, in East Coast situation, which I find to be a little bit more cutthroat than I'm comfortable with. And now I live in Fort Worth and Dallas, and I still believe that San Antonio is one of the most open, collaborative communities we have. And I think that's unbelievable, and there's an immense power to building networks through that. And as we all know, you know, when you have multiple nodes in a network, it can become a very, very powerful system that you can leverage for lots of different outcomes in that situation. So I think the collaborative nature, the openness is awesome for San Antonio. That's my number one. I'm going to stop there. Yeah, I feel good with that answer.
He just referenced Metcalfe's law for all you guys that were here from when Bob Metcalfe was talking about networks. So that's a shout out to Bob there. But you went to Trinity University. How do you see Trinity contributing to San Antonio's entrepreneurial community and the tech community here?
I think this is a opportunity for improvement, not just at Trinity, but across all the university systems we have. Now, when I was at Trinity, they just started, my senior year, they just started the entrepreneurial program. But I think that cultivating entrepreneurs, cultivating the sort of STEM careers and all that sort of stuff that come with it, and creating a strong partnership and pipeline with the business community is something that it's been improving over the last 5 years and will continue to improve in the decades to come. But I think that the university system is so essential in creating this robust talent pipeline that we'll need to transform San Antonio into, you know, whether it's the cloud situation or it's any other biotech, biomedical, all that stuff. Creating the partnerships that we need to fast track students to feel like they're contributing and innovating and collaborating in positive ways. Definitely room for improvement there.
What do you think about the whole culture of risk taking? Because there's this debate about whether kids, I call them kids, or college students, are taking enough risks, or when they get out of college. You hear the stories about startups being formed by 20-year-olds, but really those are the exceptions, and the rule is people who have some experience in an industry then leave, much like your father did, right? Mm-hmm. He was at Southwest Research Institute, and then they see an opportunity and the problem to solve, and they go off and solve it. So what do you think can be done in San Antonio to cultivate more of a risk-taking environment?
Interesting. What can be done in San Antonio to cultivate more of a risk-taking environment? I think, when I look at how my father did it, I can't think of I should say, I basically only know the way he did, right? So I can share why I think that was a smart model. Going to a research institute where he was able to study different problems that existed, understand how a big organization operated, what you needed, what kind of roles were necessary and what was unnecessary, getting a paycheck while innovating in the evenings. You can think about it that way. And finally getting to a point where you say, all right, I'm going to do this. I'm just going to do this, and I think I can do it, and we're going to see what happens. But when you take that risk, being thoughtful, and it's, again, being conscious of what risks you're taking, what tools you have to mitigate your weaknesses. So, with what I love about the Techstars and the geekdom community here is you have access to these mentors, people who can guide you and say, look, don't make these mistakes. I've already made them, right? It's sort of getting that mentorship becomes so important when you're risk-taking. And so cultivating the mentor network, I think, is extremely important to giving people a fallback and saying, I'm not just sort of twiddling my thumbs and sitting and coding something. I have no idea, how to test the market. I have no idea how to iterate. I have no idea how to get funding. I have no idea who I should talk to, how to find, people to sell to and all that sort of stuff. So building that mentor network, I think, is extremely important to cultivate that risk-taking network here in San Antonio.
That's interesting because now with Rackspace having achieved a high level of success, a lot of those founders have gone on to seed new companies. Pat Condon and Dirk Elmendorf, and they're very active here too.
Absolutely.
And of course, Graham Weston and this building. But okay, so one of the questions I want to ask you about, everybody's talking about WhatsApp. It sold for $19 billion, 50 employees, doesn't have any revenue. So my question for you, are we in a bubble here? I mean, there are more unprofitable people working for unprofitable companies in Silicon Valley than ever in the history of the Valley. And it just seems to me to be a crazy time. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are.
It's a great time to be a startup entrepreneur. Probably not the best time to be investing. That's the way I say it. So I tell a lot of my friends, I'm like, look, there's a really good trade right now. If you're unemployed, just start a company. Maybe you'll get funding. It's a great trade for you, right? That's my bubble or not. You've heard so many different sides of the stories of, Facebook is now going to get access to millions of cheap cell phones across the world, and in a way that it's an entirely different user base. Blah blah blah. On the other hand, the argument of no revenue. I don't know. I wouldn't make that deal, but Mark Zuckerberg, he has his ways. He's done very well. I'm not going to question his ability. It's just not in the realm of what I do or what I'm comfortable with, and I tend to try and operate in spaces where there's less people because I have a better chance of being in the above average in that situation. When I'm playing against Mark Zuckerberg or these big Sequoia Capital venture partners or Austin Ventures or things like that, they got 70 people that are probably all smarter than me, and so I'm just going to try and avoid that situation as much as I can and play where nobody else is playing.
And what do you think are some of the most promising technologies that startups should focus on right now?
Ooh. Promising technologies. Well, I mean, cloud technology. I always say you tend to find it. I'll give two sort of sectors, and then I'll give it sort of a step back general answer. The two sectors that I think are really interesting, obviously, web service, cloud services type, huge, and it's still continuing to grow, and there's still lots of opportunity in cloud-based services and all that sort of stuff. The other one that's really caught my eye has been, I call it the food and wellness, the health and wellness sector of healthy foods. I just feel like they're taking up more and more shelf space when I go to H-E-B. And it's amazing to think about Pop Chips. You all heard of the startup Pop Chips. In 2007 or 2006 was a startup. Last year they had over $200 million in revenue. It's a chip company. You think, how complicated is that? That's amazing. And they're probably not even the healthiest thing on the shelf, but for some reason they're healthier than the Lay's and they're going better. You know, it's really interesting to look at the food and health space. I think that's a growing representation of the mindfulness movement again. You know, people being thoughtful about what they put in their body because they know the long-term effects. So those are two sectors. Now, when I take it a step back, I think I always think that there's innovation in lots of different places, and this is by no means is where innovation happens, but it's one place that I think is always intriguing. Is sometimes innovation just happens at interdisciplinary. I call it interdisciplinary nodes, where somebody just didn't think that location-based ads was something until they thought it. You know, and it's, you go, that's not complicated. You know, why didn't I think of that? And it's sort of so trying to put together two disparate fields, whether it's 3D imaging and the medical, you know, and you know, new uses of medical applications, or taking 3D imaging to new industries, whether it's trucking or who knows. But there's lots of industries that are the last ones to get technology. So I always like to think from the back and say, what's the last one to get technology? You know, like shipping and handling. Like this is a space that really gets. I mean, people are still loading them on pallet jacks and they're still putting trucks in. And how hard is it to track my package? You know, when it's moving, there's got to be some solutions here. So I always say that interdisciplinary nodes is a phenomenal place to focus on innovation. The last one I'll add one more, which is everybody coming out of Kellogg and Booth and MIT and all these places, when they're looking at the startup world, it's all about scalability and how can I scale and how can I turn this into a billion-dollar company really, really fast. This sort of short-term focus. There's so much opportunity in local services, and I don't think people realize that food distribution in this community and what that means, or looking at picking up trash and thinking about more effective ways to utilize local services. You can change the landscape of an entire city like San Antonio if you learn how to pick up trash better. I'm not saying that whoever does it now sucks, but I'm saying there may be an opportunity to innovate, right? And you don't often think about these things. So localized services that are necessities. I always find that to be an interesting place to think about innovation. How can we make these basic services even better for our community? And it transforms so many lives through that. Whether it's through employment or it changes the experience of living in this town, and you can create economic prosperity and all that comes with that. So from a stakeholder-centric approach, I say, wow, location-based services can be a really interesting space to innovate that often is the last domino to fall because it's not the most scalable. That's what I'd say.
That's interesting. Okay, so now you're going to tell us about everything you did at the NSA. This is the part everybody's been hanging out for. Now, I'll let you off the hook there because I don't think they let you talk, do they?
Well, my wife's been waiting to hear for years. But,
really? He haven't even been able to tell her?
Well, I'll say one thing to that, which is when I got offered the job, it was sort of, you can't say no to this. You kind of see what's behind the curtain. And it was so interesting to me. You learn a lot about how the world works and different perspectives on history through that opportunity. But one thing I definitely learned while I was there was that there's no doubt in my mind that the U.S. has to continue and support STEM education. There's enough jobs open at the NSA to employ pretty much the majority of people who are unemployed, but the talent gap is so wide, there's no point in bringing them on. And that's a powerful thing to say. When we talk about employment, we talk about the economy, and there's a huge gap in what we need and what we have. And so, my eyes were really open to the importance of education and the importance of stressing, STEM careers to our youth and for future generations.
Yeah, there's a big movement of people who are just not going to go to college. They're learning the skills themselves. There's Code Up. I saw a few Code Up T-shirts right there. They're teaching them how to program here at which floor are you guys on? 6th floor or 10th floor? Okay, 10th floor. So it's amazing to me the movement that's taking hold of just people acquiring the knowledge without going through the formal systems.
Absolutely.
And seems to be like there's going to be problems for the universities down the road because they've gotten really expensive, and people are learning this stuff on their own and through internet resources and
teachers and mentors.
Yeah, I mean, it's awesome. I mean, learning is awesome, right? That's my takeaway. Learning is awesome. Learning is cool.
All right, so we're going to open it up to you guys. Who's got questions? We covered everything perfectly. All right, right here and then back there.
So it seems like your firm, you only invest in tangible assets, things like real estate. But you also said that you're really into things that are collaborative. So I don't know, how do you feel, maybe your firm in general, feel about peer-to-peer currencies, things like Bitcoin, and where that's going? And if you see that as a long-term investment, or, I mean, given the volatilities it has now, is it purely short gains?
Sure. That's an awesome question, and it's one that I've been thinking about a lot, and I don't think I have a good answer for it. I'll start out by saying that when it comes to peer-to-peer currencies, it's super interesting. I think just theoretically you can reflect on it and think about what it means in terms of institutions of state and beyond. I mean, this is really powerful movement when you think about what it can mean for currencies and that sort of thing. The challenge right now is just it's early stages. I think we've seen so much funding in the last 6 months for Bitcoin ATMs and transaction services for Bitcoin, and you can look at other currency. I think Dogecoin is doing really well. Their market cap has increased recently. It's all out there. You know, the question is, what's the right model? And I have no idea. But I think it's a super interesting thing to think about. How does that transform how we operate in terms of building institutions, building organizations over the long run? Does it change the way we interact with the state? Does it become a more collaborative, sort of global community? It's a really interesting challenge to the hierarchies that exist in the institutions that exist today. When you look at Bitcoin and its correlation to, oh gosh, I'm forgetting the exchange that it was related to. There's, you know, the what's that?
Mt. Gox?
Not Mt. Gox, but there's it's basically, you know, the deep internet, the site where you could Silk Road. Yeah, when you saw the correlation of Silk Road being open versus the price of Bitcoin, now you start questioning the legitimacy of the currency. Whether that's engineered by, you know, people who don't want you can get in all sorts of conspiracy theories like that, but it still has a long way to go. I think it's interesting to see the amount of Bitcoin that's being purchased in countries that have fixed currencies. So when you look at countries like China, where the you know, currency is fixed, and the amount of gold that's being purchased there, the amount of Bitcoin that's being purchased there, that's telling to how our systems are limited in their flexibility and what the real people think. And so you start getting some sentiment analysis that you can get out of it. There's lots of interesting things that come out of it. I have no idea what that means, but I'm just kind of sharing some interesting things that I've learned about Bitcoin.
I heard that in the past, when people have tried doing things like Bitcoin, the United States government throws a fit and eventually shuts them down.
Yeah, so there was
and even if it's in other countries, they have issues with it.
There was an exchange that was in the U.S. probably about 3 years ago, and that was buying. It was before Fantech. But there was an exchange where people could, quote unquote, buy shares in sports players. So the first guy who came out was Yao Ming, and, you know, people were buying shares, and it's sort of a market only exists if there's a network of people, you know, buyers and sellers. And if you were an early buyer, people thought you were crazy, and then all of a sudden there was a rush in. And I have a buddy who put in 20,000 on Yao Ming. It turned into 200,000. He withdrew. It's an unregulated exchange. He paid no taxes, right? You kind of think about all the implications of what that. It's another challenge of the system again. What's that?
It's a quick way for the richer to get richer.
Yeah, and so you can think about it. You can think about it in lots of different ways.
While the poor trying to catch up.
That's right. So whether it's a income disparity situation or a control issue with governments, there's lots of things that come out of analyzing, you know, the exchanges.
Periods on its way to the one world.
That's
currency.
right. That's right.
One government currency.
There's lots of things that you
we'll
can come
find
out
out
of.
though.
Right.
Wait, he had a question and then you.
I often hear that the three main areas for investing in the future are, healthcare, medicine, education, and energy. And I think energy, it's just been hitting on a lot of the things you said as a localized service, something that impacts, everybody on the planet, as well as national security. There's huge risks there. as well as the conscious capitalism of, what type of energy are you going to invest in, something that's running out or something that's, plentiful and continuing. So I was going to see if you had any personal interaction with that, or what your views on kind of how the future is going to play out, and whether kind of the ingrained thoughts or businesses that are already there and how they influence the political spectrum are going to be able to continue doing that, or like you said, there's this new kind of ecocentric type of mindset that's being pushed forward from the young people up and open mind thinkers, kind of how that's going to move forward.
Are you asking specifically at the energy sector?
Yeah, so
okay.
For energy, kind of, yeah.
Great question again. I think it's, when you look at it, a lot of it has to do with economics, right? Is it viable to have solar panels in your home, or is it a dumb investment, right? Or am I wasting my money? That's the question. Or is natural gas going to be so cheap forever that we never need to ever think about energy or coal, all that sort of stuff? A lot of it comes down to economics, and this was really a lot of my inspiration for moving to the world of finance. Going to the world of intelligence to say, I want to learn how the world works. The answer is power and money. I learned that through working at the agency. And I said, well, if I can influence that situation of being in a situation to control capital, or to influence capital, be conscious, that's how paradigms change over time. Now when it comes down to energy, and you look at the economics of it, I do think that there's a shift. There's a desire to look for resources that last over time, and it's a desire to think about it in an economically viable way, and that can be married with lots of different things. Whether it's new technologies through extraction of existing methods, whether it's fossil fuels or whatever we have, new technologies across algae or hydrogen cells or solar cells and all that sort of thing. But one piece that's interesting that I think we haven't played enough of is in the policy space. I'll give you an example of a successful endeavor in the policy space, which is there's something called PACE bonds, property assessed clean energy bonds, where rather than you having to pay for your solar panels up front when you have a house, you can get financed. And basically, if you sell the house, whoever buys it next has to continue paying the payments, just like a mortgage, right? And so that's encouraged a lot more payment because there's not as much upfront capital expenditure. And not a 15, 20-year payback period where you say, I'm not going to be here when I have kids, I'm moving and all that sort of stuff. That's one example. I think there's a lot of movement we can have in that space and continue to develop new technologies, new ideas. So that's one area of it. That's long run. I do believe we'll have a movement, and the incumbents in the oil and gas space may have some political clout. But at some point, there's creative destruction and innovation in a way where it just doesn't make sense anymore, and people will realize that. That's my belief. That's my hope and belief, I should say. In the meantime, I do believe there's applications of technology and innovation to be much more effective at our existing methods and much more thoughtful about the implications of our existing extraction methods of natural gas. And when you look at fracking, and is there a way to make sure that this runoff water doesn't get into our water supply, and can we make it at least a little bit better? Gosh, I hope so. Can we make it a lot better? That would be cool. That would be awesome. In the interim between now and when we have the clean energy, this is the solution we have. And so if we can be thoughtful and mindful about how we execute the solution and create technologies that make it even more efficient and more safe, I think that's extremely important as a transitionary period going forward.
Okay, first of all, thank you for coming to talk to us today. And my question is, as a person familiar with cryptology, how would you comment on this conspiracy theory that people using Bitcoin or engaging in any other kind of encrypted communication are in fact painting big target signs on their backs, actually stepping out and making themselves more easily identifiable?
Are you talking about the creators of the currencies?
About people using, actually. So the premise of the main advantage of the currency is thought to be or presumed to be anonymity.
Mm-hmm.
So, but as a person familiar with cryptology, so would you say that encrypted patterns of information could be easily picked up from all other noise?
Short answer, yes. I'm happy to go into more detail, but I think that it's just like any other young industry. I think peer-to-peer currencies are on the rise, and we're seeing more and more creations of different types of currency, of different type of safeguards for this currency, because that one sucks because they don't have this, and then, oh, well, you're missing this, and the next one iterates and says this is better. And it's an iterative process again, and we're just waiting to see what comes out of it. I do think that people who are using it now just have to be thoughtful about how they use them. You know, if you're using it on Silk Road, well, yes, you know, you kind of, I'm sure that the intelligence agencies across the world are trying to figure out, you know, how to put a target on your back if that's what you're doing. I mean, that's what they should be doing. It's if you're engaging in those types of activities. But in terms of the risk you're taking just by participating, I think if you're thoughtful about it, it's just like anything else, and you engage with it in an appropriate way. Then I think it's all good in the long run.
So you touched on policy as a tool, a place where we could change and innovate a little bit. But I was curious, as far as your thoughts on what level of government policy you thought would be either most effective, or you'd like to, or you keep an eye on as an organization, where you think are changing at city level, state level, federal level. Where do you think the change is going to come from?
I think my opinion, is the most effective change always happens at the local level. People who understand the situation, people who are a part of the community, and how they can think about impacting and transform a community. That's my opinion. I think that generally when it comes to politics, my response is, God dang it, I don't want to think about what happens in DC. I don't typically find it productive to reflect and to keep up with all the stuff that happens in DC. But when it comes to civic engagement at a localized level and thinking about how we can change our community, I think that's a great use of time to be engaged with the local community. And if you have the ability, engaging on a state level, but it's change comes from within. Rarely does it come from without, outside of where you exist. And people who are committed to change typically are within the system that's being changed. And so it's easier to mobilize on a local level. And I always feel that the most effective change is within yourself, and then it becomes sort of concentric circles. Yourself, and then you have your family, and then you have your community, at least your communities that you develop within the place you live, and then you have the citywide, or maybe your neighborhood. And kind of that's the focus of change that I think creates a difference in the world. So just reflecting on those concentric circles and making sure that you're engaged in a way that's meaningful on the levels as far out as you can go, starting with yourself.
All right, well, we're going to end it there, and if you guys got any other questions, you going to hang around for a little bit?
Sure.
Well, this has been really fantastic, and I'm going to be more mindful going forward, I promise. I'm going to think about what I do more after this talk, and I'm going to look into some of the resources that you talked about. But I just really want to thank you for sharing your time with us. Oh, and I have a basket. It's in the back, so I'll give it to you afterwards. But I really appreciate you coming in and speaking with us tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
And I wanted to tell everybody here that next month, March, at the end, is Tim Jennison, who founded New Tech. Please RSVP, because that way, I think I only got 15 RSVPs, but I know I got more people here, because Geekdom members are free. It doesn't cost you anything. Just RSVP, so I'll buy enough food, okay? All right, thanks.